Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My friend today, my guest, is Ngatia. He is from Kenya, and he is a friend of my friend Tony Wajira, who was one of the very first guests I had on the show last year. So, Ngatia, I'm glad you're here. The fact that you're working with Tony tells me almost everything I need to know about you, but our listeners and watchers don't know anything about you. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and tell us a little bit about um, where you grew up and where you live, so that people have a feel for what Kenya is like.
Amazing. Thank you, Ed, for having me on the show. And I believe that, yeah, we're going to have a good time. So let me introduce myself. My name is Ngatia Muhoya. I'm 27 years old. I'm a Kenyan born and bred entrepreneur. And I have my hands in two businesses right now. The first one is a startup, a fintech for health called MedNow. MedNow, in essence, provides hospital service providers with working capital financing and then collects using a digital wallet to accept mobile payments. In essence, it automates the process of origination of the loan for hospital service providers and automates the process of collection by collecting directly from the patients or consumers to repay the credit given. The second is a social enterprise. It's something that's really close to my heart, and I believe we'll be talking about it more during this podcast. It is called Badiliko. Badiliko is a Swahili word that means change or transformation. And in essence, this idea it didn't start as an idea, it started as a problem. The problem I first encountered was back in university. And we were having our general elections in Kenya. And if you know anything about Kenya, you know that politics is hotly contested, extremely contentious, and can be the powder keg for our economy. And because of this, I realized I was quite apathetic about politics. I didn't think that anything I could do could impact the social political fabric of my country. And so we started a YouTube channel, much like what Ed is doing. And we kind of collected views from young people across the country. Furthermore, I realized that young people have a lot to say about politics, governance, and democracy. But most of the time, they don't have the right platform to express themselves. So I decided, let me give them that platform. And so we engaged 2,000 people in about 3 months, and we did zero marketing whatsoever. All we did was create a poster and send it out using WhatsApp. And people would come from all over to meet, engage, discuss, and co-create a future together. And so that morphed into a public participation platform that is digital. So far, we've partnered with the Commonwealth Secretariat, and we even last year won the prestigious Commonwealth Innovation Award, given across all Commonwealth countries, only to 15 members. So that's a brief intro about myself, and back to you, Ed.
Has the government noticed what you're doing?
The government has noticed, and I'd say that they are quite receptive. They are hungry for innovation. We have a government that is almost esoteric in nature. A lot of people don't understand how they operate, why they operate, if they operate.
Yeah. Yes.
And so how we are the Council of Governors. And so the Council of Governors helps us conduct legitimate public participation across all counties.
Well, that's fascinating. So what you're telling me is that there is an openness to entrepreneurism and innovation in Kenya that is unique in that it is actually having an effect upon the society at large. I mean, am I right about that?
Yes, you're very right about that, Ed. And in fact, Kenya has been dubbed the Silicon Savannah. right after the San Francisco Silicon Valley. And so the reason for that is that we are a hub of entrepreneurship and innovation, and we want to attract venture capital, social capital, investment and impact capital. And the reason for that is that we have such a large population of young people, and unfortunately, the job market cannot absorb each and every one of them. We produce 1 million new graduates from high school every year, and only 20% of them make it to university. That means we have about 800,000 young people wandering the streets looking for a job without a university education. And this is a recipe for disaster. That's why politically, we've been known to be a little bit unstable. And this is because young people are usually paid off to commit crimes in the name of political mileage. And it's a sad state of affairs, and we believe the economy is the only way to prop up our young people.
I was there in just at this point, this right now, 4 years ago, and I was talking to a group of business leaders, and they asked me a very direct question about, and I'm curious as to what you think. And if you don't want to answer this, that's fine. They said, what do we do about corruption in government? And at that point in time, I had not thought about that at all. But is there a perception? I mean, I was getting it from several different points of view while I was there. Is there a sense that there is problems in the government which is centered in corruption?
Say corruption is the only reason Kenya is still a third world country. We would be leaps and bounds ahead if we did not have corruption. And corruption has become so systemic that it touches not only government, but private sector as well. In tendering processes, in hiring processes, it is quite I'd say the bone of contention in leadership in Kenya. And the reason for that is because we've adopted the mentality that corruption is the only way to get rich. And it's a sad state of affairs because young people look up to leaders. And when they interrogate how these leaders got their wealth, they will realize it was through, backdoor dealings. And then they themselves, the young people, will aspire to do the same corruption that the leaders did to get where they are. And so, yeah, corruption. And to answer your question now directly, how do we solve corruption? I had the privilege of sitting with the chairman of the ethics and anti-corruption, who is a family friend of ours, and he had the opinion that, and I agree with him, and I added to that we must frustrate the corrupt. We must make it difficult. We might not put them all in jail, but we must make it difficult for them to be corrupt. We have to make them have consequences, either public shaming, threatening them with jail time, freezing their assets, and ultimately we have to train the next generation of leaders to take up the mantle with integrity and character. We can't just rely on frustrating the incumbents. We have to train the next generation to have ethical and moral behavior once they are in positions of power.
Do you think that your generation, and you're kind of on that border between millennial and Gen Z, do you think those generations are not, I know you're aware of this, but do they feel like they have a way of dealing with it so that they can build a different future for the country?
I'd say there is a way that we feel ostracized by leaders. And because we feel neglected and left out, it is difficult for us to imagine ourselves taking our power. And so, to answer your question more directly, it's something we do want. We do want to see a Kenya that is free of corruption, a Kenya that is led with integrity, with diligence, And if you look at the statistics, 80% of Kenya is Christian. And so you wonder why we have so much corruption. And you realize that probably the real statistic is that 10% of Kenya is Christian, and the rest are just going to profess the faith with no real understanding or depth. And so it ceases to be a religious issue, it becomes a moral issue, a character question. And I believe that given the chance, our generation, late millennial or early Gen Z will be able to actually transform the social political state of affairs.
When I was there, I spent 3.5 weeks there in February of 2020, and I went to some of the universities, met students. Some of them were quite sharp, very attentive. I was giving presentations, and I was surprised at how much the emphasis on leadership was at all these universities, and I'm wondering if what you think about that, and whether it's having the kind of effect that you would like to see.
That's a really good question. I think it's twofold. The first part is we are paying the consequences of those who went before us and didn't do a good job. And so they are emphasizing for us to be the leaders that they should have been. And I'll give you a quote. This is my all-time favorite quote. It says that we have not inherited this land from our forefathers, but we have borrowed it from our children. And it is our responsibility to give it back to them in a better state than that which we received it in. And so the second part is that we need leaders in Kenya, in Africa, because we are such a nascent economy. We are such a nascent country in terms of development. We need leadership. And John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. I am a product of the leadership development that has gone into young people in Kenya. I've been mentored by people like Tony. I've been mentored by, my lecturers, my parents, my elders in church. And I do believe that leadership is the cornerstone of creating, just a better life for young people here in Africa and specifically in Kenya.
Before we went on the air, we talked a little bit about how 3/4 of the population of Africa, the continent, is under 30, and you told me that the median age in Kenya is what, 19?
19.
So there seems to be a huge opportunity if the country is willing to take advantage of that opportunity, which is, let's develop our children to lead in the future. Am I right?
Yes, you are right, Ed. And just to build on your point, we in Kenya specifically have over 70. Most people are unemployed and don't have the right economic empowerment. And so ideally, what economists describe Kenya and Africa going through is what is known as a youth bulge, which is a specific time in our history where young people are, outnumbering, and just the more young people in Africa than there are any other demographic on the continent. And so ideally, this is an opportunity, but it is also potentially a problem because you have a young person who has three main characteristics. 1, unemployed. 2, no opportunities. 3, lack of education. And so this person will ideally be easy to radicalize. They will be easy to manipulate by the politically elite. And so that's why all across the continent, we have riots, we have deprived politics, we have hunger and just disarray. But as you said, there is an opportunity, which is the silver lining in this cloud, which is that given the right resources, given the right leadership, given the right interventions, these young people can herald a golden age of development in Kenya and across the continent. And Kenya is one of the last emerging markets in the world. And so a lot of young people are taking advantage of this opportunity, learning new skills online. The internet has made everything more accessible. So education and empowerment can come from sessions such as this that we're having, as well as opportunities to grow and create employment for ourselves.
Well, it sounds like the country is in a fundamental transition from the way I mean, it's been in transition since the end of British rule, but it sounds like that period is now coming to an end and a new period is beginning to emerge. But the question is, what does that look like when you have all these young people who need not just education, but they need jobs, they need places to live? I mean, it's a huge problem, or it's a huge opportunity, and it would seem that this is why Kenya, in many respects, seems to be an example to the rest of Africa, and maybe to the rest of the world. I mean, that's my impression, having spent about five and a half weeks there over 2 trips. What do you think of that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And the reason I say that is because having grown up in Kenya, studied in Kenya, I studied at a university here in Nairobi. It's very evident that once you leave university and are exposed to the world of work, you realize that most people, most people are looking for ways to uplift themselves economically, socially, politically, and they are looking to tap into the minds and the ideas and the resources of the youth. And I dubbed Kenya, or rather Kenya is dubbed as the Silicon Savannah, because we have a very enterprising spirit. And the only way to harness the youth bulge into something positive is by giving them something to do. And I stand with, the youth empowerment wave, as cliche as it may sound, simply because without youth empowerment, we cannot have a stable economy. We cannot have, conducive and productive politics. That is producing to the GDP of the economy cannot sustain itself without labor. And that's why as Kenya, we invite a lot of conferences, we invite a lot of investment, a lot of entrepreneurs to come and teach our young people how to do business and how to engage. So we are the crucible of this transition. And as young people, we have to take the lead and kind of grab opportunities as they come.
What effect does what happens in the countries that surround you? I'm thinking about Tanzania and Uganda and South Sudan and Ethiopia. What Somaliland? I mean, what happens there? How does what happens in those countries where they've had a lot of disturbances? Does that creep over into Kenya?
I'd say yes and no. Yes, because we do have to be more vigilant in terms of peace and security, because we will realize that similar to the US and Mexico, for example, if the country is destabilized or disenfranchised, then you will have immigrants coming into the country. So we do have people from Somalia, people from Ethiopia coming into Kenya. And that does pose domestic threats to our security, because a lot of the time we will have, people who are good most of the time, but people who are also bad with ill intention to come into the country illegally or to perform, illegal acts. So we do have sudden incidents of terrorism over the last 10 years, about 2 or 3 incidences, high-profile incidences of terrorism. But our response to it has been swift and very I'd say very defense oriented to protect Kenya. And this is because we've had a strong government, a strong military, and we do even run peacekeeping missions in Somaliland. This is to ensure that our borders are not as porous as they would like them to be. And so and then that's yes on the yes part. On the no side is that Kenya has continued to be the leader in East Africa and sub-Saharan Africa in terms of raising entrepreneurship capital. And if you look at the statistics, I forget the exact number, but Kenya was actually head of a lot of even South Africa and Nigeria in terms of raising venture capital in the year 2023. And this is because we have created a conducive environment for business, for entrepreneurship, for startups to thrive. And this has been the main focus of our government. That has been their position, to create a conducive environment, regardless of the skirmishes that happen across borders. So Kenya is very sovereign, is very strong. Our people are resilient and very enterprising.
I want to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and innovation, but so do you have a culture of venture capital where people, wealthy people are investing in people like yourself to build the buildings? Do you have that kind of culture there?
So historically, no. But over the last 10 years, we've seen a very sharp increase in this culture. And this is because we've had success stories. We have Google setting up shop in Kenya, Amazon, Microsoft with development centers. And the reason that they're doing that is because they see opportunity here that is still in a nascent stage, but we have about maybe 50 venture capital firms located in Nairobi supporting entrepreneurship. And in terms of angel investment, I'd say people are, over the last 5 years especially, waking up to the opportunity that investments not only have to be traditional in the form of land or stocks or bonds or bills, but can be invested in young people. I'll give a good example of myself. So in my health fintech for health startup, as well as the social enterprise, we have been able to raise money locally as well as internationally. But I'd say 80% of our funding has come from local sources. So pitching to high net worth individuals, organizations, institutions, VC funds. They've been receptive to invest in us, not only because our idea is good, but because we have an understanding ourselves of the market that we are purporting to exist in. And this is because we have the local context that probably foreigners do not, and are able to solve problems at a more granular level.
When I was there, I'm asking this question because of what I saw and what I see, and it's just not a Kenyan thing or an African thing. It's a developing world thing, which is that they view the West as the sources of money for their programs, whatever the program may be, and it was clear to me that there needed to be a higher level of philanthropy and investment by locals there. So I would talk about supporting African business, African communities with African leadership and African money, and that needs to develop and grow, because as long as if you're dependent on outside money, then you're always going to be kind of under their scrutiny, and it's not going to be actually owned by the local community or the local nation. And and I get people asking me for money all the time, and I don't give it to them, because I said, you need to go develop those resources where you live. You know, and I had one guy from Uganda. He told me, he said, "Well, we don't do it that way here." I said, "Well, you better start because that's where your future is. Your future is not in in the West giving you money. The future is in you all creating a level of income or level of economy which allows for new ideas to find resources to develop."
I definitely agree with that sentiment, Ed. Though I will caution and say that a lot of the capital markets are based in Western world.
Oh,
And
no.
that's just a fact of, yeah, it's just a fact of economics. And so the limited resources that, Africans do have should go into developing the ecosystems, the entrepreneurs, the startups. But again, it is limited. And a great deal of capital that goes into investment does come from Western worlds. And it's because the Western world is almost saturated with a lot of economic and social and almost almost economic lethargy, let me call it that way, because they've already developed. They're not creating as many new markets. They're not many market creating innovations anymore. But Africa, that's where it is. This is where we're going to have the largest population on the continent in about 10 years. I think will be about I think the statistic is what, 1.5 billion people. But the idea is that the market here is huge and it's an opportunity for people to invest, whether locally or foreign. And I'd encourage, if you do find good investment opportunities, please invest, because you will be, yes, you will be supporting Africa, but at the same time, it is an opportunity to create value for people that might not otherwise have the opportunity to, seek value locally.
Well, what I felt like in the some of the interactions I had with people is that that they weren't going to make the effort to find the money locally. They felt like people from the West were an easy target for, and I think if we're investing, then we should be partners and be able to work together and not simply here's a check. I think this is, but we have the same issues here in the West, and so I think this is part of the transition we're going through. I think the economies of the world are changing. I'm not convinced that it's changing in the way people think they're changing, but I think what you all have there, because your lack of indebtedness really maybe ensures that you have an opportunity that many places do not have, and therefore it's a good place to invest as long as we're realizing that this is investing in Africa, not simply finding another way to. I guess what I'm saying is that I felt there was a lot of the old colonial mindset. I keep bumping into that old colonial mindset, and that's not going to help you grow a leadership class of young people who are entrepreneurial and innovative in the way they function. So if you want to put your money there, that's fine. I'm all for that.
I definitely agree with you, Ed. And I think what you're describing is handouts. And so a lot of people have this mentality that, we can't help ourselves. And so that is very limiting and negative, as you've said, because it will not help us. Because if we are always looking for someone else to come solve our problems, someone else to come give us money, then it will not help us at all. We'll be dependent on foreign aid. We'll be dependent on foreign investment, while at the same time, we can be a producing economy. We can generate our own income, our own revenue, our own goods, our own services, our own startups, can thrive from, internal processes and capital. And so I agree with you. It should be a collaborative partnership where Western and African investors need to discuss and invest in Africa as opposed to a one-sided, handout situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. So, what is your hope for the future? What's your hope for the future, of not only for your own life, but for Kenya?
That's a really good question. My hope for Kenya is that 10 years from now, we will stop. Excuse me.
Bless you.
We will be thank you. We'll be an inclusive society, and by inclusive, I mean we will be inclusive politically. We will be inclusive economically and socially. That means everyone will have the ability to participate in enriching Kenya, in creating value. Most cartels, let me call them that. There are certain cartels that run everything from government to economy to the banking system. But we need more centers of power across the region that will empower themselves. And I see a strong, resilient, and dominant Africa in the global economic landscape. One that, as you're saying, is not asking for help, but one that is giving help, one that has the attitude of being self-sustaining. And I see Pan-Africanism growing. I see borderless Africa, where movement and mobility of goods, business, and people is easy to do. And personally, my hope is to be part of that change. I want to be at the forefront of that, leading and making decisions that will enrich my country, my continent, and ultimately myself.
To what extent does the challenge of the future relate to a transition in how people view their tribal identity?
Great question. So, tribal identity has been a hot button topic in Kenya. And this is because we have about 42, 43 tribes in Kenya, yet only a few of them produce the leaders in the economy and the politics. And
Right.
this is because we have had a system of tribalism where it is not merit-based, but it is based off the tribe that you have. And so that is weaning away, but it is still there. And so the idea that we can be, a inclusive society also includes and denotes that we must create unity amongst ourselves. Unity in terms of people must not identify solely with their tribe, but with the value that they have to offer each other.
Yeah.
And so we have different tribal languages, different cultures, different traditions, which all must be preserved and respected.
I'm asking this question. What you said kind of provoked the question, but I'm also asking it because of an experience I had. I wrote a book, came out in 2018, called Circle of Impact, and when I came to Africa, it seemed like a book that was right for it, but it was not. It was not written for Africa, so it needed to be kind of rethought. And so I connected with a publisher there in Nairobi, and we spent 3 years reworking the book, and we changed the stories in it. Basically, it's the same book. Changed the stories in it, added African proverbs, things like that. And the plan was we're going to call this Circle of Impact Africa. And then the last week before the book was to be sent off to be printed, the team came to me and said, "We're concerned about the title." I said, "Really? What's your concern?" He says, "We don't think of ourselves as Africans. We think of ourselves as Kenyans or Kikuyus or whatever tribe we're from, and that's going to be an obstacle to people wanting to buy this because they'll think because Africa is more of a Western concept than it is a tribal or a national concept. What do you think of that?" And so we changed. Oh, by the way, we changed the title to "Circle of Impact." You have everything that you need, which is a better title too. So, what do you think of that?
I think it's almost like a false dichotomy of some kind because we have on one side the pride of being, a certain tribe. So like I'm Kikuyu, for example. So I'm happy and proud of being Kikuyu and my culture, my heritage. But at the same time, you go into the marketplace, you go into the workplace, and it is completely unacceptable to identify as a Kikuyu because it means that you are purporting to have more privilege, you are purporting to have more merit simply by the fact that you are Kikuyu and the other person is not. And so the other side of this is that we want the best people to do the best work. And so, with reference to the example you've made, I understand what the team was saying. That if you say, circle of impact, we are one people and, this will impact all of us. But if you say circle of impact, you have everything you need, I think that was the title, then you are saying that it is not about where you're from, but it's about what you have and what you can do with it.
Yeah.
And that speaks more to the individual person. It
Yeah.
speaks more to the individual than the collective of tribe or nationality or continent.
You're exactly right.
And yes, yeah, and Africa is a Western concept because Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, yes, we're in East Africa, but we're completely different. Our cultures are different. Our ways of speaking are different. If you have a Tanzanian on this podcast followed by a Kenyan and you don't tell who is who, you'd be able to tell, this person's from a different place than this other person because of their demeanor, the way of speaking. And so, yes, I agree that we are distinct, but at the same time, we are trying and wanting to become better and more unified.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, we've been through that in the U.S. where we were very regional. South, North, Midwest, Southwest, Western, Mountain. All these regions had their own kind of culture and mindset. And but as the media has kind of become universal, all those differences kind of have been diminished. And I think that will happen to a certain extent there, but it's a much more complex place than here, and it's so big. And I mean, I spent a week in Benin after I left Kenya, and that's a very different place than Kenya, and I can't describe it because I don't have any other place in West Africa to compare it to. But I would say West Africa and East Africa are very different places, and not one is better than the others. They're just different. And for us from the West, we should appreciate that and become immersed in that. We should learn about that and say, just ask, tell us more about who you are and how we can understand and appreciate what you have here.
True. Completely agree with you, Ed.
Well, I thank you. We'll whatever you want to put in the show notes, any kind of contact information or anything like that, send that to me. Send me a picture.
Okay.
I'd like to have that we can use. And I appreciate you coming on. This has been great. it's so much like all the other conversations I've had with young people from Kenya. And ask Tony about the Fellowship of Impact. There was 4 guys that kind of stuck with me for those 3.5 weeks. Well, for the most part, and they were kind of my I wouldn't say they're my bodyguards, but they were kind of my support team, and they were just like you, and I'm so grateful to them. And Tony was one of them, and you know, um, Tony's been a very significant um, person to me because of not just our friendship from Africa, but watching him develop and grow in his role as a coach and a mentor for young people there. It's just fabulous to see how he has developed, and I'm glad you're part of that group that he's serving.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yes, yeah, thank you for having me on, and I love the work that you're doing, and thank you for opening your podcast to me. I don't take it for granted.
Well, if you know of some other young Africans that you think I should be interviewing, just email both of us and say, like Tony did, I'd like you to meet Ed. I think you'd be great on his podcast, and as I did with you, we'll take it from there. And yeah, and maybe we'll start a whole series of uh, Eddie Network Kenya, Kenya or Africa episodes. I don't know. That would be fun to do. So
Amazing, amazing.
all right, thank you very much, and I hope I'll see you again soon. And thank you everyone for watching the Eddie Network podcast. Please sign up, hit the like button, and leave a comment if you would. And we'll see you next time right here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.